Welcome back to Sika Strength and welcome back to the Sikistan News Show. Today's news show is brought to you by the Sika Strength newsletter. Head over to sikastrength.com. A pop-up will appear. You can sign up to the newsletter for exclusive training information. For example, today's one that's going out is how to set up your desk so you don't have neck and back pain. A lot of you are probably sitting at a desk right now and hopefully your neck and back hurts.
Certainly all of your neck and backs will hurt.
Wait, that doesn't sound right. I hope your neck and back hurts. First up, in no particular order, we've got a lot of weightlifting to do today. But I wanted to start with this 201 kilos by a 73 kilo weightlifter. He's a junior, so in weightlifting that means the year you turn 20 or under it makes you a junior. And this is Chen Shunan. It's going to be a household name in a few years. Friend of the show, Dr. Steph Performance put up this. Great guy, physio for the Chinese national weightlifting team. You can check out our podcast we did with him about a year ago. Very interesting episode. And we got this 201 squat jerk shortly after he did a 203 kilo squat jerk as a 73 kilo lifter, again, as a junior.
When you're looking at junior lifters, a common phrase you'll hear us talking about is having a lot of piss and vinegar. And there's definitely a lot of piss and vinegar in this one. You just see the speed, the aggression that he pulls under the bar, and then the complete disregard for his own life that he jumps underneath that squat jerk with is insanely impressive. I love to see it. Loads of speed. The stability and the kind of motor pattern awareness that comes with younger lifters as they develop is definitely something that tends to mature a bit better in their mid-20s. So it is certainly something that if a lifter's hitting these numbers this early on in their career, they're just going to be more and more consistent with these numbers as they get more years of training done. But unbelievably impressive.
Next up, we've got, starting at the end of the weight classes at Worlds this year, we had Yousefi coming through on that big training lifts with this 262 kilo clean and jerk. So we saw that 263 kilo clean and jerk in training. Some people doubted its honesty if it was real, but I didn't really, to be honest, going by his training lifts. This 262 kilos is undoubtedly one of the easiest 260 plus clean and jerks we've seen in the history of weightlifting, bar no one. It kind of reminds me of Pisarenko doing like 260 or attempting 260 when he weighed like 120 odd kilos. So this 262 is something that looks like someone who might actually clean and jerk 270 kilos in competition. Yousefi didn't win in the total. He snatched only 194 kilos. Lalian snatched 215 kilos. Gore only snatched 210 kilos, which is interesting to say that 210 and 215 are the only ones, and we're not even looking at the videos because this 262 is so novel.
Something we talk about really commonly in the super heavyweight weightlifting world is who's going to come up behind Lasha, who's going to fill his place. Unfortunately, we didn't see a massive amount of people pushing Lasha incredibly hard during his career, but hopefully this next batch of super heavies that comes up is going to be of the same level, or hopefully we'll get some even heavier lifts. Obviously with Yousefi here, his clean and jerk is definitely up there of the same caliber. His snatch has some room to make up, but there are other competitors there who will hopefully be in the same position as him or in a slightly better position to challenge those Lasha numbers, which really did set new kind of levels.
Now here is probably my favourite lifter of the whole world, and this is Churkin. So he's an 81 kilo lifter, and he competed for Kazakhstan. Their triumphant return to the international platform. So he did 164 kilos and 204 kilo clean and jerk as an 81 kilo lifter. He is undoubtedly one of the fastest lifters on the scene at the moment, and it's no coincidence that his technique is pretty textbook. In a world where we're often looking for the anomalies to prove our own technical inadequacies right, here is someone who is obeying pretty general laws of textbook technique and making it work for himself. He's only 21 years old, so I'm very interested to see where he will end up. Which brings me to the point that I've been thinking about since Worlds finished, about halfway through, is if we'll see anyone ending up anywhere, because there is too many big lifts at this year's Worlds. There is too much going on, far too many. You'll see the rest of them here at the moment, and I am slightly concerned for the sport of weightlifting. I cannot see how, even if nobody is tested here, even if no one's test positive from this Worlds, I can't see how we're going to make it to the Olympics without a load of positives, depending on where these athletes end up. Surely someone from the IOC is going to be watching with interest what's going on. From a recent Congress a couple of weeks ago, actually just at the Worlds before Worlds started, the International Weightlifting Federation said that weightlifting's on really good terms with the IOC. The IOC are really happy, but I can't imagine they're going to be after all these massive lifts. Now, we love this. We love it, and we don't care what anyone does in training or in competition or whatever. But lots of people testing positive isn't great. For example, Uzbekistan is probably going to be banned next year because they've had 3 or more positives in 1 year, which means the country is banned for as of yet undetermined period of time. So I am on edge. I am concerned. We might not see positives from this, but if things keep going this way, this might not be good. Great lifting. Lovely lifting.
Phenomenal lifting.
But I think we're going to be cooked.
Speaking about the lifting here, just look at the jerk. Garth talked about how it's very, very textbook technique. It's very standard technique. We see it across much of the team. But that jerk is just absolutely Krispy Kreme jerk technique. Really, really nice. No crazy positions. Nothing mental in terms of an extremely aggressive or an extremely short dip and drive. Just nice, good textbook technique being done with absolutely world-class weights. It's what we love to see.
Putting the speed into speed strength. Here is a 205 kilo clean and jerk from a Kazakhstan competition prior to Worlds, I assume sometime quite recently. So this 205 is obviously a massive lift in the 81 kilo category. Now, all these categories are going to be gone from next year, I believe. I think they're only trialing out the new categories at Junior Worlds. So the records we're seeing in the lifts here don't particularly matter, but as a sport it obviously matters a lot, because if we have a lot of good crop of lifters, they'll obviously fill into those new weight classes. But this 205 is very, very interesting in how strong he is. Sticking with Team Kazakhstan, we have one of their 109 kilo lifters, Andas, squatting 310 kilos for a set of 4. He had some pretty big squats up before, but the Weightlifting Kaz Instagram put up this 310 kilos for 4, which is undoubtedly, of the current non-supers, so supers or less squatting, is one of the biggest squats. But to be honest, even if we look at all-timers, it's probably one of the biggest squats from any weightlifters we've seen ever, in terms of... Usually when we talk about squats and weightlifting, I'm always excluding supers because they move pretty large weights. We don't really see them. So when it comes to like supers or less, this is definitely just an absolute all-timer squat. And it kind of went under the radar a little bit.
I love the positions here. Really, really nice. Bar placement is really good, but particularly the upper back and shoulders here, just maintaining that perfect position throughout the entire squat is something we're constantly telling people to do. We're constantly looking for in elite athletes. And you see it here. The shoulders, the elbows, even the hands and wrists really don't move at all throughout the entire set. He's not driving elbows up. He's not allowing elbows to drop underneath the bar. It's just a well-maintained, strong, stable position throughout the entire squat.
Sticking with the Kazakh team and the return of the Archem Atropov section of the new show, all in its glorious return, we have Archem winning the 102 kilo category with 170 kilo snatch and this 230 kilo clean and jerk.
230 kilos, thinking back to the Olympics, and as we ran into the Olympics, the 230 kilo limit, or that line being put at 230 kilos, was something we discussed quite a lot. And mainly the discussion was, are we going to see it at the Olympics? Obviously, Archem wasn't at the Olympics. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see him there. We spoke last week about maybe the possible advantages of not having to go to the Olympics, not having to peak and taper for that competition. But this 230 would have undoubtedly rocked some people at the Olympics.
Yeah, so he snatched 170, so he snatches... I was going to say subpar, that's the wrong word. Subpar in relation to his clean and jerky ability, which is absolutely gargantuan and looks better than it ever has. So Giga Chad would have done 180 to 20 at the Olympics. So the clean and jerks from Giga Chad, even though he's the current world record holder, didn't look amazing. Now that's probably because at the end of a big Olympic training cycle, things are tough. You know, he's going to have a hard time putting out a massive clean and jerks. But I have to say, Archem is out clean and jerking Giga Chad all day. Look at these. There is no way he can't do 140. There's no way he hasn't done 140. I'm going to ask him after this new show. I'm going to message him and ask him, has he done 140 and what did he squat beforehand? Because this looks like an opener. If one of your athletes was doing this, Be like, okay, that's an opener. That's like a good attempt.
Yeah.
235, 240 after this. So Archem, again, everyone's staying safe and no adverse analytical findings. Again, hopefully we'll get to see some big lifts and weightlifting can just pretend like nothing ever happened.
Keep smiling and waving.
Smile and wave, boys. Next, we've got Olivia Reeves in the 71 kilo category with this 120 kilo snatch. So this is actually an international competition PR, and it's 1 kilo under the senior world record.
Olivia Reeves obviously has been the rising star not only of USA weightlifting but of international weightlifting, both on the men's and female side. She's definitely coming up very, very quickly. And yet again, it's another amazingly good competition performance. This is obviously down to insane levels of talent, insane levels of training and work put in, but also there's something people rarely talk about, and that's people actually handling competitions. She rarely misses lifts. She always performs well at competition. And I think a lot of the time as fans of weightlifting, we sometimes forget about competition performance, and we forget about people showing up to competitions and doing a good job as being the most important thing about being a weightlifter. I think for many of us, we'll have favourites of weightlifting history who mightn't have performed exceptionally well at competition, but made big lifts in training or made 1 or 2 big lifts at competition. In Olivia's case, she does very, very well at every competition she goes to, which we love to see. Super consistent across the board, which leads to better and more competitive attempt selections. Also, it allows her coaches to maybe push a bit here or pull back a bit there with the understanding that she's going to be able to make the lift, rather than this hope of maybe opening a bit heavier and pushing her competition to make poorer decisions.
Now, on the female side of things, for the super heavyweight category, the 87 plus kilo category, we had Lee Yan snatching 149 kilos, set a new junior and senior world record. So this is the second heaviest snatch of all time after Tatiana Kershina's 154. So this is a big return for a class that, in terms of snatching the last couple of years, kind of since Tatiana's peak, hasn't quite been up to the same level. With some kind of early 140 snatchers, but not a whole lot of that going on the last year. Some of the clean and jerks were close, but this is definitely a very, very big snatch in terms of this weight category. Li Wan is only 20 years old, so this also was a junior world record, which is absolutely massive. And while China kind of sent their B team on the men's side, they sent a very, very strong contingent on the female side. So calling it the B team isn't really fair. It's probably A team part 2, maybe the Avengers part 2.
The other A team. This just does speak to that depth again that we've spoken about in Chinese weightlifting. In recent years, many of the larger countries in weightlifting, the larger federations in weightlifting, have been cutting the total amount of funding. Obviously, weightlifting as a sport isn't as poignant as it previously was for many countries going for Olympic spots. But this definitely is yet another illustration of just how many phenomenal elite level international competitors China have. And you can really never write them off.
Now here we have Rostami lifting in the training hall. So he was supposed to compete as a 96 kilo lifter for Kosovo, and he ended up doing 180, 215 in the training hall, which would have actually, in theory, out-totaled Nurgusa by like 5 or 6 kilos. As predicted, Kianush didn't end up lifting for Kosovo. It seemed like a very strange series of events to actually end up happening. And knowing weightlifting, I was very doubtful that it would happen. Hopefully, Kianush gets a chance to actually compete for Kosovo. Apparently, he's going there this week. He hasn't been there just yet. The fault was with the Iranian side, who allegedly wouldn't release his papers or release him to Kosovo. Typically, when that happens, countries usually look for a little lump sum of money. For example, you might remember a name, Sully in Bulgaria and Turkey had their little payments to go through, and that quite often happens across different countries, or it used to happen a little bit more. Kianush still obviously racking up some serious weights. This comeback was incredibly fast, and just a testament to how talented a lifter he is. 180, 215 are huge weights. Obviously for 96, I assume if he keeps going, he'll probably be a 98 kilo weightlifter or something similar. But again, it's great to see a classic, an OG star of weightlifting still knocking around and still lifting some big weights, even if it's not for the Islamic Republic of Iran.
I think there's 2 conversation points here that mightn't be brought up all too much. The first thing is, hitting these things in the training room is very different, right? Obviously, you're lifting the same weight, same barbell, you're on a platform, but hitting these in separate sessions is obviously a bit easier, but also hitting them in a non-competition setting is far, far easier. You're not worried about the attempts coming before you, whether you have 5 minutes or 25 minutes before your next lift. You having the ability to time through those things and basically go at your own pace makes a massive difference. The other thing you have to think about here is his lifting leading up to this competition was going very, very well. And I wonder if those release papers would have been signed had he not been in such a good shape. If he wasn't putting up crazy numbers and really looking like he was definitely vying for a medal, if not a gold medal, I wonder would they have released him in the hopes that it wouldn't look quite so bad.
Now, speaking of an OG, this was a lot of people's favourite lift, I think, from the world just gone. Among many big lifts, we had Ruslan Nuruddinov. Some people are referring to him as Uncle Ruslan now that he's 33 years old. So this is actually his third world record. He clean jerked 242 kilos. This is somewhat of a symbolic lift for the lift that Ilyan would have beaten with in 2014, which was 10 years ago. He also set the senior world record in 2020 at 241, and now he set the world record again and will have his name stamped on the books and left there when the classes are gone for the 109 kilo category, 242 kilos. Very interesting. So before the competition, he said he just wanted to do his best and improve. There was talks of him retiring after this competition. He snatched quite light. It was something in the early 180s. I think it was 183 or 184. And I assume he was doing that to save himself for a big clean and jerk to set the world record. He won the class by a huge margin. This 242 is a gargantuan lead. And it's testament to how much a big clean and jerk can really make up for you. Big snatches can work, but you got to have a decent clean and jerk to match with that. But we see in Archem, Atropov's case, you know, if you can have a middle of the pack snatch, upper middle of the A group, for example, but if you're blowing people out of the water with your clean and jerk, you just get so many extra kilos ahead. I really like the technique on this lift as well. Ruslan is pulling under super aggressively. A lot of people will admire his technique because he's quite a limmy lifter. He gets that barbell super high into the hip pocket, but most notably, he doesn't over pull the barbell, which is a very common mistake. A lot of times people think you need to get the barbell super high in the clean, but really it's about getting under as fast as this.
In terms of the longevity of his career, in terms of what we've seen him do over the last decade and a half of weightlifting, I really think it's yet another add to the massive camp at the moment of people performing better into their 30s, even into their mid and late 30s. We obviously saw it with Lou, the shape Lou got back into, but this is yet another case of people making unbelievable progress and continuing to lift incredibly heavy weights slightly later in their career. This is undoubtedly down to some improvements in athlete welfare, people looking after themselves and looking after the athletes a small bit better, but it's also just due to trendsetters like him, like Lou, going out there, doing it and making it much more achievable for the next lot of lifters who think, maybe I don't have to retire when I'm 25.
Next, we've got Karlos Nazar snatching 183 kilos for a snatch world record in the 89 kilo category. Now, not only did he snatch this, obviously win the category by obviously a big margin, he's untouchable in this category. He flew to Germany in the Bundesliga at the weekend on Saturday, like 3 days after this, and did 170 and 220 kilos. So Karlos is unstoppable. Allegedly, he had a shoulder injury coming into this, which is something that would concern me. You know, no matter how talented you are, no matter how much of a horse or genetic freak you are, whatever else is going on, continuous loads of this weight on the body of this magnitude can wear you down. No matter what anyone says, no matter whatever biosocial model that you subscribe to, eventually these things can result in injury. And I can't remember a lifter since the Bulgarian time who's just been smashing weights like this consistently week after week, certainly never to this extent. So I would be concerned that he's going to injure himself prematurely. You know, when you're a younger athlete, you're made of piss and vinegar, you're immune to these things, you're made of just rubber and just magic. So hopefully he's smart with it. Seems like they know what they're doing, of course, but I just hope nothing premature happens. Like, allegedly he's moving up to the 98 kilo category class, which is probably a 190 plus to 35 plus lifts. So we all want to see that and not lose Karlos.
there definitely seems to be a concerted effort to keep him in shape. As we've spoken about previously, him staying in very good shape, staying within touching distance of those heavier weights for a prolonged period seems to be working very well. What I would say is the league format for weightlifting often isn't the best thing. Obviously, Bundesliga is amazing, or general weightlifting leagues are amazing if you're a intermediate level to advanced level lifter. But where the issues start arising is that load that comes on the body, like Owen is talking about. I certainly think for the sport of weightlifting, more regular competition is very, very good. But the form that regular competition should take, and the formatting of the seasons and formatting of the competition schedule, is definitely something you have to pay massive amounts of attention to.
Actually, for the end of the weightlifting section of the new show, we've got Tank Murakami squatting 300 kilos for 10 reps. So I thought Tank was cutting weight, so I think he was moving down to the 109s. So I'm not sure when or where this is done, if or what even body weight he is here. If he's a 109 or close to 109 during this, then this is absolutely enormous. Although that would be almost ridiculous if he wasn't. If he was 109, this would be insane.
I think it's feasible to believe he could be between 120 and 130 kilos for these.
Yeah.
I think Tank, we've seen it regularly, we've seen it a handful of times when Tank went as a super heavy to competitions and he was noticeably bigger, almost like he was periodizing his weight up as he led into that competition. And certainly it altered his technique in ways that you might deem to be non-ideal. He definitely looks a bit more trim here. His lifting as a lighter weight class athlete was gorgeous to look at. So I am excited to see what will happen as he drops down. Clearly his strength isn't taking too much of a hit. That's assuming, of course, this is a very recent video.
Now moving on to the strength section of the new show, we've got Jesus Oliveira's, or Mega Gojira, which is probably better known as, squatting 465 kilos or 1,025 pounds. He has a tally in his training of how many times he's squatted over 1,000 pounds. I'm pretty sure the last time we saw it, it was 15. So I assume this is just another take in the books, which is very, very impressive. Sheffield seems to be the big one that a lot of them are going for. I know they had a bit of prize money like this year, or the last one that's gone, so it'll be interesting to see how much more they're giving for the next one. And as usual, it's a massive squat from Mr. Gojira.
I think one of the most common things that we hear or we see in the comments when Mega Gojira is doing these crazy weights, it's, oh, would you ever just do 500 kilos? You're kind of edging us here by not doing the 500 kilos. He's obviously very, very close, right? But the difference between 465 or 470 or 475 and 500 kilos is astronomical. I know we'll commonly see people saying, oh, in terms of percentage, it's not all that much. Like it's 10% jump to go from 450 to 500, which is absolutely mental to think about it in that way. But those kilos being added on at that top end weight, like he probably only has the ability to do that twice, maybe 3 times a year. And it's not necessarily just something where every training block and every peaking cycle is going to do absolutely perfectly. It's not something that you're going to be lifting these weights without any risk of injury or risk of things going very, very wrong throughout an entire block. So I don't think he's holding back on us in any way. I think 500 kilos is just absolutely mental.
Here we've got Ashley Wilson deadlifting 236 kilos conventional or 520 pounds. I don't actually know what body weight Ashley is, but she's not, let's say 100 plus kilos or whatever, but a 236 kilo deadlift is massive, especially conventional deadlift on the female side of things. The sumo versus conventional obviously is a continuing argument that will never stop, but as we covered last time with Ashley's deadlift, she does a lot of great things, and this is something you consistently see when we're looking at those good deadlifters. We're looking at that toes forward, we're looking at that somewhere between hip and shoulder width, ideally not as wide as shoulder width stance, and then we're looking for that nice proud chest. We don't really want to see that position where we're kind of looking at the ground and we're leaning forward. That's something that I don't know if it was kind of perpetuated by the CrossFit style of teaching, where we'd see that stacked neck and we'd look for that straight spine. We used to see them putting a stick or a dowel on people's back and wanted that straight line on their deadlifting, and I kind of get where they were coming from, but in practice it's just not something we see people moving for. Now when we look at this head up position, That doesn't mean we're necessarily looking for a very arched back as much as we are in weightlifting. Usually when we're deadlifting, we're probably going to see more of a flatter back. Again, we're not looking to teach that upper back flexion. If it happens, sometimes it's okay, and certainly maximal deadlifts like this may or may not be an issue. And it's probably a thing for you as an individual to make a decision on what you're comfortable with. Ideally, what we would look for when we're looking for those positions is a consistent back flexion, extension position that remains like that largely throughout the lift. So we don't want to see an increase in that flexion, or we don't really want to see an increase in that lower back flexion as you're pulling. Very few people, maybe some idiots, might argue and say that an increase in flexion as you're pulling maximal deadlifts is probably totally fine. Even the most optimistic of movement optimists probably would agree with that, or at least I hope they would. But in general, Ashley obviously is pulling massive weights here. This is crazy. 260 kilo conventional deadlift is gargantuan.
An amazing part of Ashley's technique, which I don't think is spoken about too much, is how well she continues to lock out the barbell. So you'll see as she passes her knees, probably around the 3 or 4 inch after the knee mark, the barbell speed significantly reduces. And this is the point where we see people going to secondary or non-ideal positions to lock out the lift, right? This might look like increasing the amount of flexion at the knees and really pushing their hips forward, where we've a weird kind of double bend movement going on. We also see people really driving their shoulders back, pushing their hips forward, which brings us once again to a non-ideal position where our weight is too far forward. Or sometimes we see people rocking back onto their heels, which leads to this incredibly unstable lockout. You'll see in Ashley's case, she continues to drive with her legs throughout the entire lockout. So she keeps her knees involved. It's not like she goes to a full maximal knee extension and just tries to lever it back with her back. She keeps working very hard during the lockout, which leads to this very, very consistent lockout position, although the barbell speed is very, very low.
Here we've got the triumphant return of Tom Haviland to the news show with a 302 kilo pause back squat and then a 292 kilo paused Zercher squat. Tom Haviland is someone who has garnered a lot of internet fame, and to be fair, rightly so. There was some talks of fake weights and stuff, for example, but I don't really buy into that. I'm sure we would have had him ousted by now. Surely someone would have, for example, cleared it up, or we would have figured it out by now. I don't think that's the case. I certainly don't think it. I never thought of that until people kept mentioning it. Every time we bring him up, someone says it, but I certainly don't think so. I think a lot of people just have to appreciate that there's people like him out there, and there's not many of them, but I think he's as real as it gets, and this 302 kilo squat is enormous. I don't love Zercher squats myself. I don't really find them great to watch or super endearing. Squats for me, barbell back squats are the big one, but you've got to appreciate a 290 kilo Zercher.
Oh yeah, it's definitely very, very impressive. We've spoken about the Zercher before, and it's probably not our favourite thing, as Owen has mentioned, but I really like the back squat here. I actually think for a lot of people, if you're training to be strong, if you're training not for a sporting application or for weightlifting or something along those lines, but you're training just to be bigger and stronger in everyday life, having that slightly wider position, sitting down into a good position in a pause squat is definitely going to be very useful. Is it something you should use in every training cycle? Absolutely not. Can it be favourable in some circumstances? Definitely. Now, the other thing I really like about the slightly wider back position or slightly wider hand position that he has is you see he maintains that actively straight wrist throughout. He's obviously an incredibly big dude, and big dudes get tight shoulders. It's just how it happens. So you'll see he scoots his hands out a bit wider on the barbell to maintain that good stacked wrist position. This is definitely something you should be working towards, particularly if you are in that larger or tighter shoulders group of people. Getting a slightly wider hand position on the barbell but maintaining a good stacked wrist will do wonders for the ability to maintain a good back. That slight amount of extension in the upper back.
Next, we've got Chiang Kai-Chi. So this is posted by the IPF Uzbekistan Instagram. So this is a 300 kilo squat in the 83 kilo category. And this is such a pretty squat. So this is aesthetically very, very pleasing. So it's a low bar squat, but very, very similar high bar positions. This is quite similar to how we'd endeavour to teach athletes to low bar squat. So we favour that knees forward position, not a super upright back. That angle is dependent on the length of your back, the length of your limbs, how strong your back is, how comfortable you can keep that barbell in a good position, what's legal within the rules of your federation, so where can you keep that. Some have rules on how low things can go. So in this position, if we can get that low bar position, keep it comfortable, then we like to keep the quads being the primary driver. It works incredibly well. You know, even if you were to compare this, if you were to look at a 3D stick figure compared to, for example, someone on the other end of the spectrum, Meg Gojira's 465 there, the movement pattern is very, very similar. If a biomechanist was to give us a rendering of this, it's not too dissimilar. It's not a classical kind of west side sitting back style stance. So low bar, for a lot of people, is one of the best ways you're going to move the most weight within a powerlifting competition. But if you can move with this aesthetically, you know, that's really nice too.
The other thing that's really nice about this is the tempo of the squat. I think particularly with the low bar squat, and particularly in, let's say, the stricter federations in terms of their movement parameters that you have to hit, we see people going one of two ways. They either really, really slow down the descent, where they're almost waiting for that bottom position to come up and meet them, or else they dive bomb the bottom in the hopes that utilising a bit more of that stretch shortening cycle will get them a bit more depth and a bit more power out of the bottom. What you're seeing here is as close to an ideal tempo for a competition level low bar back squat as you could possibly get. Good speed, what we'd refer to it as is sitting down with intention. Still gets a small bit of that reactive strength out of the bottom position, but he's not really hindering himself by really squeezing slowly down, or hindering himself by dive bombing the bottom position and losing his positions because of that.
And moving on to the athletics section of the news show, we've got a 785 pound trap bar deadlift from low blocks from the lacrosse team. And this was Andrew McMeekin. And this is, I think they're called the Tigers.
The Tigers? That would make sense with the branding around that.
It's an interesting lift, the trap bar deadlift for athletes. It's something that gets a little bit of slack. So it's always interesting when we see a general lifting population commenting on athletes doing the training for their particular sport, and this is kind of, you know, another one of them. The top comment is, nothing says ego lifting like high handles from low blocks.
There's a slight lack of understanding here, right? Because when we talk about ego lifting, we're talking about facilitating lifting heavier weights through the use of equipment or through the use of a derivative or portion of the lift where it will allow you to do more, right? What we're talking about here is really high squats where maybe you're sitting to a box, or maybe loads and loads of knee wraps, so you limit the amount of actual quad development that has to go on. In this case, there is definitely an advantage to an athlete who, like, they're not in a strength sport, right? They're playing lacrosse. There's a big advantage to an athlete being able to contract maximally while maintaining those really good positions and actually feel like what it's like to generate that amount of force. It sounds funny, and it particularly sounds funny to people who are involved in strength sports, which a lot of you are watching this video. We don't commonly think about the amount of neurological adaptation that has to happen for us to contract maximally and get everything firing at the same time in those good motor patterns. It's definitely a skill that you'll get some added sports performance from. If you can get somebody, whether it's an isometric mid-thigh pull, or in this case, whether it's a slightly higher than normal hex bar deadlift with maximal weights, there is definitely an added advantage to an athlete being able to recruit that much muscle fiber that quickly.
Next, we've got Desiree, who's a sprinter, power cleaning 100 kilos, so track and field athlete. Female track and field athlete, this is a pretty massive lift for 100 kilo power clean, and overall very, very good techniques. That's kind of the first thing people will look to critique or kind of view when we're looking at the Olympic lifts for athletes. Look at the rack position, a little bit low. Catch position, not necessarily something I'm too worried about when we come to power cleans. That's a bit of a misnomer when people are looking at the power cleans. Generally what our issue there is repeated efforts where we're catching super wide, if we're catching in a position where our knees are coming inside our feet. She's quite a long-legged lifter, as track and field athletes often are. Often don't have the best ankle mobility for whatever reasons that might happen. So when we look at our catch position in terms of width stance, I'm pretty happy. And then if we look at that rack position, of course, it is a little bit low, but she's getting a lot of benefits from this. Her first and second pull are really good. She's very, very fast underneath the barbell. She's actively pulling underneath it. And she actually has a good rack position when it's on her shoulders. Realistically, a poor rack position, while not ideal, obviously it's not going to help you lift the most weights. When it's caught like this in a power clean, most athletes will be comfortable bailing it forward. The real issue then would be if we were strapped into the barbell, which is something we often see track and field athletes doing, which is definitely something you want to be looking at from an experience point of view and a competency point of view. You know, some athletes are super competent with it. I myself, somebody who's been weightlifting for 13 odd years, I'd still be somewhat hesitant doing really heavy cleans with straps, and it's something I wonder about when it comes to the track and field culture, is that we necessarily just haven't seen anyone absolutely ruin themselves with a heavy clean with straps on. And so in some cases people are super competent. Of course, power cleans in that scenario are generally pretty safe. It's when we see full cleans, or if we don't have the ability to catch into a full clean with straps, that's when we might start to see the issue. I'm kind of surprised now that I think about it that we haven't seen an athlete mill themselves like we did with that American weightlifter.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a number of instances in weightlifting. Maybe the athletes are more willing to just jump away and push the barbell away from them. But one thing as a learning point you can definitely look at here, in Desiree's case, she has quite long limbs, as Owen talked about, but the start position here is pretty much perfect for what she'd need. I think a lot of us, as we're learning the clean, as we're learning the snatch, we want to get our hips lower. It'll feel like we're getting more power off the floor. Certainly it will feel like we're using our legs more off the floor, but then it puts us in a poorer position. You'll see here very, very high hips. Those hips are well above the level of her knees, and it puts her into a much better position to ensure that good bar path as she pulls in it. So it's definitely something, if you're not sure what's going wrong with your clean or your power clean, look at that start position. Are you of a similar build to her? And are you going to be able to utilize a start position with those slightly higher hips? I think you might be able to.